Yeah, very, very interesting. All of us like that everybody's gonna look at it. It's probably different now than former.
Good morning, Phil. Patrick, can you hear me? Or Phil?
And does that help? Patrick is on mute.
Yeah, I just want to know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
And Arrow. I'm gonna go shut him up.
Okay. Be quiet. Okay.
Sunday, Linda from Patrick.
Hey, Patrick.
Yeah.
Morning.
I'm going to go off video to keep from ruining anybody's breakfast or something like that for a short period.
I still got a computer where the sound seems to go haywire halfway through a meeting. I think it's when it gets hot. What happened to Phil? He left.
He did.
Oh,
He
well,
was first on too.
easy come, easy go.
Yeah.
Linda, I'm going to take notes this time so I can kind of get it into the flavor of here's why we came up with the answers we came up with.
Yeah. I have I talked a little bit to Jerry and I will talk more to Catherine, but my sense is what the council wants is the options with your kind of top priority, what you
You're
would
right.
recommend, but definitely pros and cons on more than just one option.
You're right. Although I think we'll still have priorities.
Oh yeah, I think you should. I mean, I think that's important.
Well, I meant not just priorities, but for instance, if we decide that we would all be more in favor of a cap than a percent, I think we need to say that and explain the whys, but also give the pros of the other.
Right. No, I think that would be fine. In fact, I think that's what you should do.
Yeah. It's hard when you have how many members in this committee plus how many people in the council, and everybody, because they're the kind of person that wants to be on such a committee, likes to be in control.
That's right. Well, I think your presentation at the workshop was great.
Good, thanks.
And I think there was a very positive response from the mayor and from the council on what you guys had done.
Yeah,
Especially
I think
that, yeah, especially that good neighbor.
right. Yes, I like the way it's come out.
Yeah, I think it's
And the
great.
fact that it's no cost to the city.
Yeah, it's even better.
Mhm. I was more concerned about the where the night sky was heading.
Yeah, I did some research on that, and I can't find anything that says dark sky increases crime or
And the reason is, if you look at what dark sky is, and I sent a picture to both Catherine and Mike, dark sky doesn't mean dark ground. Dark sky means dark sky.
right. But
And I think that's a misunderstanding. And I think when you do if you do a survey, unless people understand what dark sky is, the results won't mean anything.
well, I think the issue is, and I think that's definitely true at Catherine's house. If you go to dark sky light, she's
Mhm.
going to have to add some additional lighting to make her house accessible at night.
Or
So,
she's gonna have to add the right kind of night skylight.
right. Well, no, the right kind of night sky lighting, but she's got some stairs that are
Right.
so far away from her front door
Right.
that there probably should be some night sky lighting there. So I think
Right.
what it really means is you're going to have to rethink lighting. It's
Right.
not it's bad. It's just you're going to do it differently in dark sky, and
Yeah.
that's why we
I
need to
think,
give people plenty of time.
right. I think we've got lots of people here now.
Okay.
Just-
Good morning.
Morning. And we've got Phil back.
Yay, Phil.
Yay. And now you're Phil, not Phyllis. Who else are we? Jill will not be here. She's got a court thing.
Anupam. We're missing Anupam.
Right. And Judy won't be here.
Right.
So I think just Anupam. Let's give him a minute or two. We've got 2 minutes. And we got Max.
Oh, great.
Welcome, Max.
Hey, Max.
He's there. He just doesn't want to say hi.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Phil. Does anybody have Anupam's phone number? Okay, I do. Let me do that and we'll get started. Oh, I can't because
Joe, do you want me to text Anupam?
yeah, would you?
Sure.
I've got my phone tied up with
Yeah.
Zooming. Everyone looks so serious.
I know.
Sorry about that.
So I did text him. So
Okay, all right, so we'll get started and hopefully he'll chime in if he's not in India or someplace like that. Did everybody listen to the workshop? Did anybody not?
Did
Carol,
not.
did you? Did not?
I
Okay.
listened. I
Okay.
watched it.
I'll just go over it real briefly. We just talked about the Good Neighbor letter and the window film, which both now will go to the Tillamook County Visitors Association for prettying and distribution. We also need a cover letter to go with that. If anybody wants to work on that with me, I would love the help. Thanks, Cheryl. So we'll do that in the next, like week or so that they'll be able to print it out. But my thought is it should just say something to the effect of, here are two things that are going to everybody in Manzanita, and please put this in your window, and please put this somewhere where you have access to it, the brochure, and it'll help you all. Something a little better than that, but that's the general idea. The other thing
I have one thing, Joe.
Yeah.
There was one thing missing from that, and that is the comment by Jill Petty when Pat and I and Jill were working on this, that there be a statement as to people could be fined for violations. And I don't know if that should be added or whatever, but that was definitely Jill's recommendation.
Anybody have any feelings about that?
Well, wait, this in the cover letter that goes with the window treatment and
No, not
good na-
it would be on the Good Neighbor brochure that there is the possibility
okay.
just to cover us legally. She thought that it was important that a statement be made that there would be a fine possibility if these were violated. I know that is stated on the STR license where they state the license rules in the homes, in the STR homes, but Jill was concerned that people be warned ahead of time that they could be penalized in a way.
Do you know how it's stated on the form in the STRs?
It's stated a lot of different places. After almost every ordinance, it says something like, and if you don't do this, you could be fined.
Well, is that they're like, non-violators will be prosecuted, but isn't there a quick one sentence you could just hook on the end? Are you getting it, Patrick? Is that what you went and got?
Read it if you'd like.
Well,
that'd be
I
great.
was just thinking if there's one quick sentence, we could just reproduce it.
It says failure to obey established rules and regulations of the city may result in the issuance of a citation with a fine up to $1,000 for the first offense.
Ooh.
And it says
Personally,
go to the website under ordinances for parole ordinance regulations.
Okay.
anybody else have opinions about that?
So
Max,
where are you talking about putting it? Just
on the Good Neighbor brochure is where Jill was suggesting it go. Personally, I don't think it's very good neighbor.
Well,
Yeah,
but couldn't it just be simplified to say, the first part of what Patrick read, violation of these ordinances are subject to a fine.
yeah, that's much
Something
better.
simple. I like that
Something
too.
simple, but just would meet the criteria for, yes, you were notified that violations result in fine, but it's not as threatening as what Patrick just read.
Right.
You didn't write
Shaking
it,
your
I just
finger.
read it.
No, I apologize. I mean, that sounds like, a very official finger statement, but maybe just something a little.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole, I mean, to me, the brochure, it talks about, I'm just going to bring it up for a second. Except that Linda, I need you to.
I'm going there here in just a minute.
Well, I think isn't what Jill's saying is for a legal aspect, notification would give us a better position, is that people were notified that the violations could result in a fine. And you can
I
even
think
put that.
I think that's what Jill was.
Yeah,
was,
it's a legal thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I still don't think I think it's overkill. I don't think, if you snort cocaine on the sidewalk in front of the Little Apple, nobody needs to notify you that that's against the law.
Well, I don't think a violation of the code is in the same category, but okay.
Yeah. The stuff on the inside, I mean, here's the inside. So
The Palm Springs brochure has it on the very end at the bottom, on the last page, on the back of the brochure. That
This is what,
Cheryl Cheryl
this
had
is what
sent.
would be the back of our brochure.
Yeah, so it might go on the left at the bottom. I don't know, just if we want to be clear about that it could
Well,
result in a fine.
At the bottom paragraph, you could say, well, it already says Manzanita has developed ordinance and guidelines to help preserve the values that frame our good neighbor policies. And then you could just put a sentence that said violations of ordinance may result in a fine.
I think that would cover it.
And I don't think that's too heavy-handed. I think that's just information. And everybody else, thoughts?
I like your version, Cheryl.
I like that too.
Just as a quick thought, I appreciate Jill's comment, and I'm sure she maybe prefaced it with, "I'm not providing legal advice," as she does and is smart to do. And so I like the language that we landed on now, like just now. And my only other thought was, and I don't, want to incur, cost or put a drain on process or resources, but would it be worth next time city staff engage the city's legal counsel, just a quick check of, is this appropriate to include? Does that get us, I mean, just as a final, thing.
How about if we said Manzanita has developed ordinances, fines, and guidelines?
Well, that seems more, I don't know. Either way, I
Unfriendly?
just think
Yeah,
that seems unfriendly, where I just think if you
Okay.
say, if you violate the ordinance, you may be fined. I don't know.
Cheryl's, I support Cheryl's version. I think they'll get it.
Yeah.
okay, so we'll stick it in somewhere in this area here.
I have one other idea that was given to by a citizen, and that was to include a QR code for access to the Manzanita website. And I don't know.
It can be
If that's
done. I
something-
think it's a great idea. I think we'd have to take the type down a little bit. So if it can be done, I think that's a great idea. It's, and people were asking for, the council was asking for a QR code at the EVCND section also. So if we can get the QR codes in, I don't know how small they have to be. I mean, how small they can be and still be doable. Does anybody?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that, but Joe, couldn't we, as cute as it is, I'd hate to take the type so small that no one could read it. Couldn't
Yeah.
we
Right.
take out the little recycling bin, which I know is kind of cool, and just
Oh,
put the QR code there?
Oh.
Or is there a
Linda
place
likes
on the
that
back?
QR
I
code.
know, I like it, but, or
You know, we
maybe on
can
the
put it-
back.
We can put it here. We can
Or
put
to
it
the
on
left.
this back page with the short-term rental questions. Instead
Okay.
of
Or
right here
Yeah.
where we've got the city, go to the city, we can put a QR code there because there's room.
yeah, that's a good idea. Yep, I like it.
Okay.
And were there a few more pictures that were going to be added? I really like the idea of adding something about the wildlife.
Yes, but we don't have them yet.
Lori, we don't have them. Okay. Anyway, Lori just did a wonderful job, I think.
Okay, moving on. We also talked about the priority list that Patrick put together and that people on the committee put in order. So from that listing, the priorities, the first one was re-envisioning a citywide cap, and the reason for that is twofold. One, it's an important thing that we need to do, and the second thing is we have a deadline on that, and the temporary cap ends in a year, and if we don't come up with a solution, the city's just going to be left hanging like, well, what should we do now? So it's something we really need to focus on. The second thing on the list was density, which is a huge topic and not something that's going to take us a month or two to fix. But should it be by location, by street, by type, by timing? Should it be at all? Just things we need to look at in the upcoming months. I want to just reiterate something that Catherine Stock, our newest council person, said at the workshop on Wednesday. She said, before we answer any question or try to solve anything, the first things we should ask ourselves are, what are we solving? What are we trying to do? And I think that's just good advice. So we'll keep that in mind whenever we're thinking about something. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to solve? The next thing was a process for tracking complaints and problems. Layla points out that Max will be doing that for complaints that come through him. But we still have no way of tracking complaints that come through a private owner or an agency. So again, do we need to? What are we going to do with it? What would it solve? So that's on a priority list. Should we have some incentives by size of rental, by number of days, by anything else? In other words, should we treat one STR differently from another STR? And what are some of the incentives we can offer? That's down the line. And then an ordinance review. There's always going to be needing tweaking of ordinances. One that I can think of is parking. Our parking ordinance doesn't really work for Max and Mike. So we're going to need to look at that. And then the last one, and I've talked to several of you about this last one. The question is, what happened to things like traffic on my street, which was high on the survey as an anti-livability thing, housing for workers, speed limits, how do we get more long-term renters instead of short-term renters? What happened to all those things on the priority list? And I guess the short answer is many of those things are not solvable by the short-term rental committee. They're more city issues and city problems. And as a citizen, I think the way that the council would like us to go at it is, as a citizen, you can make those recommendations. For instance, Linda, what's the name of the guy? Dennis Tong? Is that his name?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Has brought to the council twice now, can we lower the speed limits? Can we do it in a less hammerhead way by saying 20 is plenty? So that's something the city is looking at. Wonderful thing. But it's not the short-term rentals committee's issue to solve. And that's what the council is saying to us. And I know that there are a lot of issues that that a lot of you and me would like to get to, but I think our better response is to hold off on that, go directly to the STR direct issues like density, like capping versus percentage, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody want to chime in about that before we go on to today's topic? Michael?
Sure. And I guess maybe taking a step back to the comment with, I believe from Wednesday, that we want to make sure that we're solving that what's being proposed is solving what the issue is. And I think I think density can be a tool. I think cap can be a tool that we look at, and some of these other things too. But I guess what would be helpful for me, and we talk about this as a group, is something that is a either a statement or a structured list that says these are the things that we're trying to address. And I know the survey put that out there, and so but I guess I'm feeling is we're missing a little bit of a step to where when we look at a cap or we look at a density type of policy, we say is policy related to this, and how we implement that solving an issue around noise? Is it solving an issue around parking? Is it solving an issue on STR related traffic, or whatever the list is? And so I guess I would ask if the committee wants to have something like that before, or as we are, I don't want to delay anymore, but as we are doing a deep dive into some of these big picture issues, cap, density, et cetera, that we concurrently produce this companion, guiding document or whatever form it takes. I don't know. Is there an appetite for us to explore that as a group?
Kara?
I think that's a good idea in the sense that could we not have some kind of, I don't think it'd be hard to do, just go back to those priorities that came up on the survey and say, as we're doing our work, is this a guiding framework, or these things are not related? Or because I do think as we begin the work of making some recommendations, we're going to address some of those livability concerns. I mean, we can't address all of them all the time, but it might be helpful if we kept those in mind, and they might help guide some conversations we have about issues and about next steps. So I think it's a good idea, Michael.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good way to look at it, is to have those somewhere. Traffic on my street, noise, pets, all the rest of them, and say, what does this thing we're solving right now do for those things? That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, it's certainly when we make a, as we've been charged to do as part of this advisory group, is to make recommendations and advise on policy as they relate to short-term rentals and livability. So I want whatever we recommend to be defensible. I want it to be clear and objective, to where they can formalize that policy, and should it be implemented through ordinance or other, that it, one, if nothing else, passes the sniff test, but stands up to, should it be appealed or come to some other process in front of council. So thinking about them too, and how
I
they
was just
implement it.
thinking along those lines, if since it's really clear that those are city responsibilities, those are not necessarily short-term rental committee responsibilities, but decisions that you make may affect those. So maybe a statement is something like, though these are primarily the city's responsibility, this is how we've been able to help in this way or affect it in this way. I think we need to be pretty clear about whose responsibility, where do they fall?
Mhm.
Right. Bookends would be great. Again, I hear what, Joe, the example of traffic, speeds, that's not something that I feel is in our wheelhouse. But and I pointed to this example before just because I think it is such a great example. But the safety triangle, right, or the vision triangle at intersections, when that's a safety issue that is a citywide issue, but it's very strategic when we come to implement it, when they do an inspection at a home, they look to say, hey, is your tree out of the public right of way? Can people see as they go around the corner? And in particular, I have two intersections by me. One's almost right out in front of my house, and then another one's a block and a half away. Walk to the beach all the time with my kids. And I'm very appreciative that that policy is in place and it's being implemented, and it's part of the inspection and licensing process of STRs. It's a really smart way of taking back the public right away and making sure that, safety policy is implemented in all facets of what the city does. So it's a smart, efficient way of accomplishing a goal that may span, whether it's in the TSP or safety action plans, or what other type of long range planning or visioning exercise the city's been doing. It's just a smart way of implementing it. So I know we've got these big, I don't know if we want to call them, core policy areas around cap density, but it makes sense to also have these secondary or tertiary policy areas that we're able to explore, again, within the bookends of what we're expected to do. I don't want us to waste our time and energy and resources to chase down a bunch of oddball stuff as part of this process.
Patrick?
Let me just get my hand out. Yeah, I think we're all basically in a similar place, and we all want to accomplish the greater good for Manzanita and use kind of our ability through the short-term rental committee to provide ideas to the council that they can take, since it is their responsibility, and they can make policy with those. I think for us as a team, I think it is important to separate our primary goals from our secondary goals from our tertiary goals. I think we know that we're trying to help the community with the things that came forth in the survey, like noise, primarily. We've made huge strides in a lot of these things. And so I think it's very important to put an order down and work our way one by one through these, rather than, I feel like in the last year, sometimes we find ourselves just in shotgun fashion, just hitting every single thing, and we're really not accomplishing. We can accomplish far more if we prioritize and work through these one by one, because each one of these that we put together will incrementally help, the city as a whole.
So speaking of which, let's get to today's topic, or we could talk about this part forever, but I think we hear what Michael's saying, and let's keep those side priorities on the side but visible, and think about them as we're going through. So today is the re-envisioning the cap, and the issues are, I think you've got them on the agenda, but I'll just go through them. Should it be a percentage? It was previously 17.5%, or should it be a cap? Right now, there's a temporary cap of 230 for all zones except C1 and R4. Or, speaking of which, if it continues to be a cap, what should that number be? And should it include C1? Should it include R4? R4 is the buffer zone, and I've got a picture that I can put up later, between C1 and residential. It is residential, but it allows businesses on it. Michael lives in the R4 zone, for instance. There are some pros for pushing SERs to the C1 zone, the commercial zone. And so that's the next question. Should we encourage clustering in those zones? And if we come up with a recommendation, and that recommendation is taken by council, by the way, council would like to see all sides of the arguments, the pros and the cons, and how we came to our conclusion, kind of like if you were in math class in high school, you had to show how you got there. And that will help them with their conclusions and their decisions. But if we say, okay, we should have a cap of blah, 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 should we revisit that? And if we do, how often should we revisit that? So those are all questions. I think the way to start, I just want to show you the picture of the C1 and the R4 zone, and then let's talk about a cap versus a percentage. This is the, this part in the middle is the C1, and the little greens are current short-term rentals. And then in the red are the R4s, and the little red chunks are the short-term rentals. So that's where they are right now, just to give you an idea of what the C4 and the C1 and the R4 are. By the way, I won't swear that these numbers are 100% accurate. They're pretty close.
And Joe, could you go over what the R3 was again?
R3 is the next section down. So there's also R4, the area over here where can you see my pointer?
Yeah.
That's the R4, that's the R2 zone.
Okay.
And then R3, R4. This is the golf course is the SSR zone, which we all know about from Manzanita Lofts if you went to any of the planning commission meetings about that. So it just, I believe, Linda, Max, maybe you can, or maybe somebody else, it's how many units or what kind of units you can have within that zone. Anybody know specifically?
I believe that's right, but let me check. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, it's just the you can have these kind of houses in
Right.
R3 and these kind in R4, and also in R4 you can have commercial. So
Yeah, and it's limited by it's a one dwelling unit per 2,500 square feet. And so based on the lot sizes that you see there, the map not up anymore, but most of those are 50 by 100, which means that you could have a duplex in a majority of those. So.
Okay. And I know some of the lots up by University, for instance, are 50 by 70, so that you can barely have a house, much less a duplex. All right, so let's talk caps, percentages, thoughts.
The other issue, or an issue I'd like to bring up, is these homeowners associations that are opting out of the city.
Yeah,
the STR thing. Is that a separate issue, or?
It's a separate issue, and it depends on whether or not if we go with a cap, it doesn't matter. If we go with a percentage, it matters.
Yeah.
So I think first we discuss pros and cons of percentages versus caps. Michael?
So just maybe a quick check, and I apologize for not knowing this off the top of my head, but as we dive into this topic, the survey, like the community overall, wanted to see a cap in C1 and R4. Is that, or they wanted that to be part of the cap? I think certainly long-term and second, or full-time and second homeowners did, and I think even a surprising percentage of STR owners felt that too. So that was kind of interesting. So I just wanted to frame that as we move into the discussion, that this was, I think, tying it back to the survey, that this was prioritized in there.
Can I just speak to that for a second, Michael?
Okay,
I think it was, in retrospect, a badly worded question.
Oh, okay.
I don't think people understand the difference between cap and percentage. They just wanted to have some kind of control over how many STRs end up in town.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's that too. I think if I don't think they would have been opposed to a percentage if it was 3%. I mean,
right.
I think we didn't ask the question correctly.
Yeah, great on a curve. Well, you know, and the other thought on this is, you know, when we look at commercial or high density residential, is that there's an expectation that there's a higher intensity of use in these areas. It is intended to be a, you know, more vibrant zone. Although I don't have it in front of me, as somebody who's more familiar with the comprehensive plan, it'd be helpful to
Michael, I'm just
refer.
gonna stop you. I'm just gonna stop you a minute because you're jumping to the next part, which is
Okay.
the C1R4.
Okay.
Let's
Sorry, I
start
thought
with the percentage versus cap.
All right, I'll take a dive. I think I tend to lean towards a percentage because I think it would give us the ability to look at the town more closely and of the pool of houses available. Because it seems to me if we pick a number, it's a random number that would not be associated with, as you said, homes that have HOAs that are not in the pool. How do we, I mean, how would you determine a number? What would that be based on that criteria? Just, I don't know. Where I feel like a percentage of available homes or homes that would be subject to possible BSTRs seems like a more equitable, and I know percentages can be confusing sometimes to folks, but if it's clearly explained, then that seems to be a real transparent, kind of easy to understand where we came from, what that number is related to.
Mhm. Okay, so
Go ahead.
so I'm just thinking that then the question would be, if we go with the percentages, the question would be, is 17.5% too high? Because as our community becomes more dense, which is already happening, where every lot is being filled in, and that would definitely affect the overall cap. But anyway, I'm just wondering if 17.5% is where we would want to be to maintain the livability.
I don't know what the percentage would be, Carol. I just think that that's a number that would be based on some concrete data of some sort versus
Yeah,
a number.
we'd have to.
Yeah, there would have to be a
Yeah.
discussion about that. I was just voicing that I think maybe a percentage is something we should talk about, but I'm open to anything, but I just don't know if you come up with a number, what that number is based on. It seems random to me.
Right. Yeah. And then there's the percentage in different neighborhoods, like some neighborhoods already have
density.
more than,
Right.
yeah,
but
that
that's
ties in
density.
with density.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick?
Sorry about that. You know, I think that I like Cheryl's comment about, you know, we can't be arbitrary about this. And I think that it is possible to come up with a number that is based on a cap that we've kind of been working with for the last, you know, 30-ish years. And we started with a random percentage. It was taken out of the blue because it was just based on how many STRs were they aware of and how many houses were there. And it just happened to be, I think, 17.5. I think that's the story that Leela shares. So that number worked until very recently, or probably that percentage, the number based on that percentage. I think that's a reasonable starting point, and that becomes a basis for that number comes out at about 233. We have about 266 when we count in the flow from C1 and C4 right now. So it seems to me that if we came up with a number between 233 and 265, and we'll talk about that, I mean, that will be close to that percentage range. And that, I think, we have the ability as a group to explain why it makes sense to be in that range and to potentially cap it at a number, because then the city regains control of how many STRs there are. I think it's important that the city is in control of how many STRs there are overall, rather than developers. As it is in a percentage basis, the more that to Carol's point, the more that land is filled in, basically that just means the total STRs is a function of how many houses do developers want to build. And then we lose control. Whereas this is, I think, a process for us to think about this critically and go, how can we regain control how can we set up a process where we know how many short-term rentals there are going to be, and we know a couple things when you talk to business owners in this community. We may have reached a peak in terms of how many folks can come and visit us in the summer. And so to find ways, within our purview, we potentially have the ability to set a limit on that. If we do it on a percentage basis, we don't necessarily have that, but we could use percentages to determine a number that seems reasonable. And this is the beginning phase. Those are just those are my 2 cents. I would think, I know this is jumping the gun, which Joe pointed out, but if we should probably figure out what we want to do with R4 and C1, in addition, to ensure that we know what that total number or total percentage would be.
Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl, then I'll chime in.
Well, I think I was looking at the question on the agenda, and it says, should it be a percentage or a total number? Obviously, if you come up with a percentage, whatever that percentage is, it's going to equal out to be a number, right? So what I hear you saying is we should have a number based on a percentage. Is that right?
Well, it's what I think is, I think the percentage has driven our number up and up and up, and we've just hit this point where development is about to continue on at a higher pace. So the number is going to rise if we keep tracking it to a percentage. I think,
but that's assuming the percentage has no guidelines. That's assuming it's just a total percentage, right?
Correct. And the citywide cap has always been based on something. And so I was just addressing your point, which is if we pick a number, it shouldn't be arbitrary. And what I was just saying is, if we do pick a number, we can use the history of the percentages and the percentages today to be our rationale. So it's not arbitrary, and yet it's fixed. So we regain control of how many short-term rentals there are in the future.
I agree with that, and I think the other thing that having a set number rather than a percentage does is take that pesky problem of HOAs off the table. And I think that's one of the things that we need to look at is the income to the city. And if HOAs are funny things, anybody can be an HOA. There's a HOA of, I think, 4 units on Dorcas. They don't allow 3 units. 3 units.
I think it's 3 units, right?
Yeah. Danielle says 3 units. And it's an HOA. So any little unit can become HOA. So if one of the things that we need to think about is the city needs a set amount of money coming into it, even with the revenue diversification, there's still, we rely on short-term rental income. So one of the things I think we look at is the number now enough of a number? And if it is, can we then go with a cap that we've factored that into? And I agree with Patrick that the taking it away from the percentage and making it a number that maybe we look at every 3 years, maybe we look at every 10 years, but if we look at it every 3 years, we are taking changes in the city into account. And I think that's good. I'm going to call on Michael, and then I want to hear from Danielle.
Thanks, Joe. And I apologize earlier. I misunderstood the question. When I saw the C1 and R4 map, I thought that's where we were going with it. But to take to that question of density versus cap, for me, density makes more sense. It takes it removes the decision from council and puts it as a math formula. So if you can get behind, I mean, how much more clear and objective is that? So I think the perception is that it removes bias. So density makes a whole lot of sense.
You talking percentage?
Yeah, I'm sorry, percentage. Yeah. But with that though, I think it would be interesting, as this discussion moves forward, to say maybe different areas have different percentages. And that kind of goes back to maybe an earlier comment, is if we have zoning too, but what if we had neighborhoods, and there's different percentages for those neighborhoods? But that's a different approach. I would also say too, and then I'll let Danielle go. But when we think about percentages versus just a numeric cap, and to say in a development community or whoever is driving it, I mean, the city has that's why they're required to have a 20-year plan. They know what their buildable lands inventory is. They know based on what the zoning and other considerations, development consideration constraints and opportunities, what that number is going to be at, approximately at year 10 or year 20. And so it shouldn't be a surprise if we have something simple like a math formula that's percentage based. So
Danielle? There you
Sorry,
go.
I'm doing this for my phone, guys, and it's apparently a little smarter than I am today. So I think everybody knows who I am, but my name's Danielle Johnson. I own Manzanita Beach Getaway here in Manzanita, and I was on the STR committee there for a little while. I don't have anything profound to say. I just had a comment. I think, and I'm not sure if you guys would agree, but I think if there is a density issue with the city, and I know there's a few streets that are high density and just have a lot of vacation rentals on them. I think if the city were to address, or if the STR committee were to address density and look at things density wise first, versus percentage or hard cap, I feel like if we as a city can come up with a density solution, that almost would dictate if a percentage or a hard number would be better. If that makes any sense. At least that's how I think of it. My husband and myself right now are looking at Bend for purchasing property. I would turn it into a short-term rental over there so that I can bounce between Manzanita and there. And I've been following Bend's short-term rental regulations, and they seem to have it really figured out over there, sort of. They just had some big changes. And I know that I think the city of Manzanita, if I'm not wrong, has looked at Bend and what they do over there. And, and I'm not a huge fan of this, especially in our small area. But for density, they go ahead and say you can only have a rental used to be every 250 feet. They just changed it to 500 feet. Which is way too big for our small town little area. But that is a density thing that they have issued over there. I don't know if I'm for that or not, to be honest. I haven't given it 100% of my attention, but I know that is something that a lot of municipalities are switching to. Again, I don't know how big of an issue it is here. If it's just a couple streets, we may not have to do something that drastic, but it is being done in other larger areas. I do think that as the city grows, the hard number is kind of tough, in my opinion, because you have all these additional houses added. But again, we've had this moratorium and things have been great. They've been fine. I don't feel like we're deprived. I just talked to Judy a couple of days ago. There are licenses available right now. I don't feel like we're having to wait forever. And that's fantastic. I feel like what Joe and Patrick have been saying all along is there is a balance. And I feel like right now is kind of fine, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel, Patrick. I see a big smile there, but I feel like it's working.
I just to kind of piggyback on that, I feel like we're very close to a really good balance point for our community.
Yeah.
And if we go beyond this, we don't have the infrastructure of a Central Oregon where you have a community like Bend so close, and we don't have
The
all
roundabouts there.
Yeah, we have to realize that we do have a point at which we really do go too far. And if we have found a comfortable place, then I think we potentially are very close to a number where we can all talk about it over time. That could be our sweet spot. And let's memorialize that. And like Joe said, hey, we can revisit this in 3 years, 5 years. And to Daniel's point, I'd say, you know, there have been a lot of things that have taken place, I think, in the last 12 months, you know, with respect to Layla and Judy and Max, and then the team here putting together education. We're going to make sure people have a better understanding of what the challenges are. Max and code enforcement officer and, you know, the city are going to be around to, you know, to be better at enforcing the things that we need. And the city needs us to talk about a citywide cap and memorialize that, re-envision that. And I think that's going to be important to do first. And to Daniel's point, I think, and gosh, everybody's brought up, Michael brought up, everybody, density is something we need to talk about. Density has so many facets. I think it's going to be a lot easier for us to figure out a citywide cap first, and then work at that second layer and go through all the different things that are part of density, like how many per neighborhood, how many per house, how many per, you know, per month or year. Like those are all, that's going to take months of discussion. And I feel like we could probably get through the citywide cap. Given the things that Danielle and everybody else are talking about, we can actually come up with a pretty good sweet spot and explain why that is a good thing for the community. And then that takes a little bit of pressure off of Linda and the rest of the council. If we can support it in all the ways that everybody talked about at the beginning of this meeting and through till now. And I think it is maybe a good starting point to do a citywide cap, have that basis that the city needs us to set, and then work on, you know, take some time to figure out how the things that have changed recently are improving the situation, and then work on all those elements of density to make sure, you know, which will take time.
And another part really fast about the density over in Bend, they've broken it down into zones or types actually. So and that, I know that they're much bigger area, but could that be scaled for the city of Manzanita, like you guys were talking about earlier? Does C1 have a different you know, cap than, you know, R4 or, you know, whatever? So that I kind of, that's not a bad thing to look at, I think. I know it makes a little bit more complicated and probably a little bit more work, but that could be a sweet spot as well for pleasing the local residents as well as our visitors.
Thanks. Phil and Max, either of you have anything you want to say on the topic?
Yes, I will chime in. So a lot of the information that I have gotten for, excuse me, the what I do to look at other cities, very common theme is for example, Las Vegas, they do 600 feet until the next short-term rental house. I have seen that. I've looked in a whole bunch of different cities, and that has been very common with the cap rate, and they kind of go more towards the density rather than a strict number. They also are very heavy on zoning too. I know with Manzanita, significantly smaller than most areas that have these short-term rentals, but I think maybe I kind of, from the last couple of months of being here, I kind of see how it is right now. And if we were to any reason take away short-term rentals, I don't know what that would look like. Like if the 233 that are there and we change it to, let's say, 17% instead of 17.5, what would happen to the 0.5% and what kind of chaos that would form. But that's just how I view it and what I've seen from other cities. Excuse me.
Thanks. Phil?
One thing you might want to look at too when you're looking at neighborhoods is the lot size that are in those neighborhoods, and also the ingress egress with regards to traffic.
That would, you mean when we're talking density, or if we were to?
When you're talking density, yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts about cap versus percent? I don't want to come to a conclusion or vote at this point, because I think we need to look at all the other
Right.
aspects of it, but,
Let's take some time to think about it.
right.
But I guess I would just ask everyone to think like, what is the downside? If we set a number, and that can be anywhere from 225 to 325, it's going to be in this range of, if in percentage terms, that's between 15% and whatever, like 25%. If we really figured out what is the right number, or maybe we see a number close to where we are today, this is if we have this place and we set a number in that range, what would be the downside of creating that cap, supporting why that number makes sense, and then providing that to council to then not be in a position like Lincoln County was, where the whole thing elapsed and they came down to the wire and they didn't have a plan to re-envision their citywide cap. We know for a fact density is a huge issue. We're going to get to density. But it seems like density will take a lot longer than us just asking ourselves, is a hard number similar to where we are today? What's the downside of choosing that? And that's we don't have to figure that out today, but it's something worth thinking about. And I'm curious what you all think, like, because I don't see the downside of that yet.
I don't, and I think that's a good point. And not only do we need to look at the downside of what would be the downside of having a cap, we need to look at what would be the downside of setting a percentage. I think we need to look at the downsides as well, not just the positive. I've got lots of hands. Start with Cheryl.
Thanks. I kind of agree with Danielle, because this is this issue I've been struggling with. I don't think we can come with even a number, or I think it would be in our best interest to maybe, I know you're going to hate me saying this, Joe, but maybe think about the density. What are those ideas around it? Because that's where I think the number is going to fall. I don't think we can set a number until we flesh out where we are with this density. If we're going to look at proximity, because that's going to impact, if once you set a proximity, you maybe need to look at streets or certain neighborhoods, how many houses are on that street, so how would it impact that area? And so if you, and I know, Patrick, you like the number, and I apologize in advance, but just choosing a number or sticking with a number, I feel like that's very arbitrary and is not defendable based on any mathematics or any thought to the zones or regions or streets. And I think it could come back to bite us if we decide we want to do a density thing with whatever the proximity is. We need to have some basis for determining a number. A number in the end may be okay based on the density, but just putting one out there at the beginning, I think we're not informed enough. I don't think we know, because we all have a lot of ideas about this density and how to manage that, or suggest to the council what works or what we've seen in other cities. So I don't think we should have a number until we flesh out the density a little bit more.
Let me,
apologies in advance.
I got it. Let me just tell you my thoughts on that. Let's say we do put in a proximity density of, 500 feet, whatever it is. And so over time, we lose some of those short-term rentals down by the beach. If we have a percentage or cap already in place, there's room for those. There's room to have short-term rentals off the beach. And one thing that we need to be really careful of is money coming into the city. I mean, it crass, but that's what it is. If we still need to have, I think, X number of dollars coming into the city, and that would be with the cap or the percentage, and where they are is not as important as that they are. Same with excluding or not excluding HOAs. We still need to have this many dollars funding the city. Michael?
Yeah, I just have a couple, hopefully quick comments. One is I see these, I know they're kind of in a mesh, but I see these as really two issues, percentage versus cap. I'd really I'd really like to see that to be driven by something that is objective, is defensible. I'd love to see it tied back to what the city's comprehensive plan is pointing to for that vision over 20 years. To say we want X amount or X percentage of short-term rentals as part of our housing mix. And let that be the driver. I like the idea that it's percentage because it's dynamic and you can tie it back to an objective policy making framework. I would like, I'm curious, you know, if we wouldn't have had the cap, you know, from April 2021, how many more STRs that would have added to our community? I know I've asked the question before, and it's, you know, not fair. Judy's not here, but maybe that's a question I'd like to see from staff. Just, you know, just to see, you know, how you know, what would that look like?
Michael, I don't have the number either, but given that there are 8 openings on the short-term rental list, I would say, and that most of the new build has been in the Highlands or in C1, I would say little.
Right. Well, and the companion question to that would be, I think the city has a buildable land inventory, but I'd like to see some numbers come from the city to say what does that look like when we forecast out, you know, how many STRs would be added over a 10-year horizon or a 20-year horizon or whatever, you know, to make it in alignment with what maybe what their comp plan update would be. Because there's letters, and I'm sure we've all gotten them, and, you know, from interested citizens here in town that have done the math on their own. And I just want to have something that comes from the city that is formal and it would help, you know, guide policy.
I think that's excellent. We need that number.
Yeah. So if the city increased the number of houses to 2,000 as opposed to 1,600 or what it is at now, the number of rentals at 17.5% would be 350. If there were 2,000 homes in Manzanita. So
right now we're at about 19%, so it's even higher than that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I'm going back to Danielle's comment that she said, and since she's involved in the business, that what we have right now is working and it just feels just kind of right. And we don't have a demand. So, I mean, a demand for more. We have vacancies. I think it's 8 vacancies right now for STR licenses. And so maybe for now, we should just stick with the number and see how things flesh out, with the idea that what we could add is more hotel units or whatever to accommodate more people in the commercial zones and our, I think it's our 4 zone. With the lofts coming in, those are have been classified as dwelling units, which sounds awfully close to an STR to me, but anyway.
They're not going to be short-term rentals, Carol.
They're not going to be short-term rentals. So maybe just staying with the cap right now and revisiting that after we work out the density issues.
That cap expires. So we need council needs to say, yes, we are going to continue it for.
Yes. And it's another year before it expires.
Right. We have until March 2025, but we want to have something to council before then.
Way before then.
Way before then, right.
Yeah. So anyway, my suggestion is to stay with a number that feels right for the city, and then not to worry too much about the percentage or keep them in kind of balance with each other, but just to max out at a number.
Let's talk about the C1, C4, whether it's a percentage or a number. Should the C1, and I think we should take them separately, C1, C4, should they be included in that percentage? Should they be exempted? Should we be pushing short-term rentals to C1, for instance? Michael, Patrick, I know you have some ideas on how, for instance, you could do that. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, Well, I like your question. I was wondering if we could just maybe just before we talk about it, just kind of have a show of
Okay.
hands to see where we are, because those are two separate issues. And I think the second one was, um, should we be kind of encouraging short-term rentals to go into this commercial area? You know, yes or no. And then the second one is, should this be involved in the cap? So like, I'm just curious, like, how do people feel? Do you feel like we should be encouraging people? Does it make sense to be encouraging them in to the C1 and R4 area? I mean, I think it does. I'll raise my hand. It's one way to kind of find a way to potentially allow for help with density out of some of the higher the dense residential zones. It's one tool in our tool shed. But I was curious if anybody's for that or opposed to that. And this is just using R4 and C1 as kind of a tool, as a potential goal to move as many as we can. There aren't a lot of spaces in there, obviously, but does it make sense to move it in there and treat it as a as one of many of 20 parts of our plan to kind of have that as a place, or do we just treat it? We don't find any way to encourage kind of growth in that area to
Patrick,
help out the more dense
you
areas.
walked C1. Are there many places that could be short-term rentals? Are they mostly
I did.
business?
I walked from 101 and up by Michael's house down to the water. And I did not, my number of houses that were eligible were in the teens. I might not have been a good count, but and some of them are very small. There's at least one or two that are like 1 or 2 bedroom places. So if we're going to try to move our our occupancy 10 places to here, I mean, it looked to me more like R4 was where more of the short-term rentals were than C1. There aren't that I thought there were more opportunities to get into C1 than there were, but that just is what it is.
There's, by the way, I did count based on my semi-faulty numbers, but it looks, the R4 density looks to be at about 20%. Just FYI. Danielle?
Just a little bit of, I'm sorry, I just stepped out of the room to deal with an issue. Just a little bit of clarity on the on the zones.
You muted again.
Sorry,
Okay,
is that map still up with the zones?
Is it up with the zones? Like,
Yeah,
have
is the,
zones-
Can you put the map
mean,
up again?
yeah, the map really quick. Sorry.
You mean have the zones changed lately?
That's what. Yeah. Danielle, you're
You're
muted.
muted again, Danielle.
Oh my gosh, I'm not even touching it. Sorry, guys. Does it, were you saying, does it make more, are you asking the question, Patrick, does it make more sense to have a higher density in C1 or R4 or both?
Just both. Let me take a step back. Going back to how we started this with Catherine Stock's question. What problem are we trying to solve? So the reason that this area is uncapped, my understanding is that there was the council and folks in the community said, hey, why don't we encourage growth of short-term rentals into this central zone, into this kind of commercial zone? That was the reason it's uncapped. So there was a push for that. And so the question I think comes up. I mean, it seems like that makes like it seems like it's a good idea. I think the challenge is, what tool did we use to promote that? And what happened is we had a huge amount of growth overall in terms of the number of short-term rentals, because it was a percentage base and because we had an open area in this area. Now, I like the idea of funneling, but I think there are other ideas for funneling. Like, for instance, we could have a second waiting list for STRs, or a prioritized waiting list where everybody is on this list based on the date they get in. But maybe if you're a C1 or an R4, you can jump higher in the list. We can find ways to prioritize this area without keeping this area open. And once again, we can get to a total number.
I would be interested in knowing, and I think you just said this, Patrick, I would be interested in knowing why they chose Laurel, why they chose that area. It's a very residential area. What was the
Oh,
reason?
yeah. When you walk a block off Lanita, the streets don't look. I mean, this is like it's Michael's. Michael lives on it. You've got Dorcas on the other side.
I've got
This doesn't
multiple
look
rentals
this
on
isn't
that.
this doesn't look commercial at all. You know, so it is.
No.
I mean, I wasn't part of that, but it gets back to it. The I think the survey kind of said, hey, overall, maybe we need to treat all these neighborhoods from a citywide cap basis the same, rather than have one group that can have as many as they want. It's
Mhm.
okay to have them have as many as they want, but as long as we don't go above a citywide limit. And so we can have a way to funnel. We can use things like the waiting list to funnel groups into R4 and C1 if that's our interest and priority, and yet still honor a citywide cap that gives us control over the total. You know, we know that density is part of this. And this goes back to Cheryl's thing. I think it's important to say that density and citywide caps are not mutually exclusive. We can work on them both, and we have to work on them both. But they
Mhm.
are two important steps. We don't necessarily have to do density before we take care of the cap. And density, density is also going to the impact of density is also going to be influenced by, gosh, how well does max addition help this process? How well how nice are the streets going to be once we have a better understanding for how the rules work, and we have people to call to help us, with these issues that have bugged people so much. Some of the tougher houses, or some of the tougher guests. We have some ways to counter things like traffic, noise, etc. And maybe we need to let those things work out before we get super hardcore about what are we doing on a streetwide basis or a housewide basis. But what we know is we do have a cap citywide to think about, and what we know is we have this uncapped area in C1 and R4 that I think it's worth bringing it into the fold and finding a way to funnel things in there, but have a citywide cap that honors all neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Who else from the committee? Anybody, Kara?
Well, my thinking is if we funnel STRs into the commercial zone, we'll fill up the commercial zone with STRs, and then we won't have room for the businesses and some of the other things. So that might be something we would want to think about. And we don't allow businesses back in the residential areas. And one of the concerns I had was that they filled up that nice area behind on 4th Street, before the sand kind of area, with several STRs. And it would have also been a really nice area for some businesses to be tucked in there, like a pharmacy or some of these other things that will affect the overall livability of the city. And if we fill up with STRs rather than hotels or other small businesses, then that closes the door.
Although again, you can't tell someone, I will only sell to you if you build a pharmacy.
Well, but to not encourage people to build, not to make an active statement about encouraging people to build STRs in the commercial zones. It's just a thought.
Michael?
Sure. So it's been mentioned a couple times before. Yeah, I live in the R4 zoning, or R4 zone, and have my STR there too. And in fact, at the council meeting when we first looked at the cap, I was one of the folks who spoke at the time to not have the C1 and R4 be part of the cap. And at the time, and I would still say it today, is I think when you have an underlying zone of commercial or R4, which is a higher intensity use, it's high intensity residential, you expect a little bit hustle and bustle, you expect vibrancy, and when you look at a map, a lot of cities, you have that commercial, and then you have R4 or R3 as a buffer as it transitions to more of a quiet neighborhood feel. I think it's quite striking in Manzanita. As mentioned earlier, you do go half a block off of Lanita, and it's you would think, I mean, it's a nice, quiet, peaceful neighborhood. But the underlying zone is there to encourage whatever that use is. So, and I do, you know, I do think that's, I think that is a good guiding principle. In particular, a lot of work went into and thought when they designated that zoning. That being said, I think, you know, long-term residents in apartments in a commercial area are a great anchor to have, that's year-round and creates people there year-round. And I think that that's a different type of vibrancy that we see in the off-season. You know, it's the person that you get to wave to in the morning. It's the person that still goes to the coffee shop because it's right there, or go to the little market because it's right there. And so I do think it's important to have a healthy mix of what that looks like, even in a commercial area, to where you have some long-term renters there in addition to the short-term renters. So I do think having some type of percent, you know, I would advocate for a percentage-based limit or restriction or guidance there, and maybe it's a higher percentage based than the rest of the rest of the city. You know, maybe we, based on comfort, say that we expect a mix that's more in line with 25% or 30% or whatever it is, or 20, you know, versus 15 in other neighborhoods, or maybe the beach neighborhoods are at 20%, but when we get up on the hill, you know, drop down to 10 or 15 or something like that. We have
So
to
you would-
reconcile. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
So you would be in favor of including them in a percent or a cap, just as Patrick was saying, make it different or give them a priority?
Yeah, I think a percentage based, you know, limit would be good there rather than an outright cap. And I do think that because of the zoning and the intent of that in the city's long use or long-term plans, long-range plans, it should get special consideration that it should be higher, whether we frame that as encouraging SDRs to go there, or you know, setting the limit higher than what it is. I don't know, but that's where you would expect them to be in a commercial or high density residential. So,
Phil, I'd like to hear the planning commission take. I know you're not representing the entire planning commission, but from a planning commission aspect.
Well, I like the idea of having a cap citywide, but allowing the neighborhoods to dictate what the percentages might be.
Mhm.
And I think we ought to let the C1 zone just develop on its own and not micromanage it. And I'm not sure about the R4, although there was a reason that it was set up as an R4. And again, I go back to what my original statement was to you, Joe, is that we've got to look at lot size, and we also have to look at the potential for the traffic that's going to be generated by whatever establishment is going to go into these neighborhoods. And I don't like the idea, or I'm concerned about the fact that we would push one particular neighborhood over another with regards to encouraging developing STRs. Patrick, I think, said he walked a particular area and noticed a certain percentage of homes that would be available for STRs. What would happen if that home is turned down and it is torn down and is developed into a two-story structure where you have an STR upstairs and downstairs? That changes the format. So when you're looking at building size, and potential what could go on that building. Also look at the lots too.
Thanks. Anybody else on our initial look at including C1R4? Or should we move on to HOAs, which I think will be easy?
Well, real quick, like, does it feel like to you, Joe, or to you all on the committee, does it feel like it was a good experiment to keep R4 and C1 wide open and regardless of the citywide cap, but maybe it's better to bring it back as it was for the last 30 years and have all neighborhoods included under the citywide cap?
Well, the C1 and R4 were never included in the 17.5%. They were always open. So the city
I
continued.
didn't know that.
Yeah, the city continued the openness.
I thought it was based on, okay. I'll be honest, I think Phil said that he kind of advocates a citywide cap. I would agree with that. I don't think there should be a neighborhood or zone that can have as many can bring the city above, you know, its goal for short-term rentals.
Well said. Anything else? Okay. If we come down on the side of 1%, what about HOAs that don't allow STRs? And included in that is HOAs who allow midterm STRs. Some HOAs say you can have a short-term rental, but it has to be 7 days or more, for instance. So that you got to enter that into the equation as well. So feelings, what are your feelings about if we did have a percentage? Because if we had a cap, it wouldn't matter. But if we had a percentage, what about HOAs? And what does that do for the city in terms of when we brought this up before as we should do this? Judy pointed out that, as I said, HOAs can be formed at any time. They're harder to unform, but they can be formed at any time. So for the city to track, all right, if it's 17.5%, 17.5% of what number, which houses are HOAs and which aren't, and every time it changes, they have to track that it's changed, that number has changed. So that's just another thing to be aware of as we're thinking about that. But HOA thoughts? How many of you, let's just ask it this way, how many of you would favor excluding the HOAs from a percent if we had the percentage? Just raise your hand. One finger, one hand. One hand. Okay. And those that would not exclude the HOAs? One.
A different reason though.
Yeah, what's your reasoning, Patrick?
I think once again, like, why do we want to exclude HOAs? And I think that the reason that comes up is people are nervous about how many different houses there are in unincorporated areas, how many different houses there are in HOAs, how HOAs can fluctuate back and forth. And I think we're afraid to lose control of that total number of houses, which increases the number of short-term rentals. I think the goal is let's contain the amount of short-term rentals by reducing the total number by taking out HOAs out of the total number of housing stock.
The reason for it, Patrick, sorry, the reason for it is, let's say there are 100 homes built in an HOA. If you add that 100 homes to the 17.5%, it's 17 more homes.
Yeah.
But
that's
if
my
those
point.
homes,
like the idea of the HOA is basically to contain the total number of short-term rentals. And I think a better way to do that is simplicity. And I think every city that has failed in this process has created way too complicated processes and calculations. And I think if the goal is to contain the STRs I think that's the number-based process works the best versus a complicated calculation where HOAs are in control of it, and just the number of STRs that can happen go up and down based on what HOAs do. Once again, I'm nervous about having control being the number of short-term rentals being in control of developers or HOAs. We can
Which I get,
control that
but-
number better.
Which I get, but if the rest of the committee votes to have a percentage-based process, then how would you feel about the HOAs being included in that process?
I mean, that's a hard one. I've watched how hard it is for Judy to control and contain things before Max came based on here's what policy says, here's how it works. We can't overcomplicate it. We don't have the resources to do those kinds of things. So if it were me, I would keep it simple. And if we're going to go percentage based, you just got to deal with it. And then you lose control of how many houses there are. And I wouldn't, I would not try to create a calculation that nobody can figure out, because everyone wants to know, how did we get to this number? And if you have to figure out, well, HOAs were this last month, now they're this month, that's the most complicated thing possible.
Okay. Cheryl?
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Me?
Either.
Cheryl?
The reason I would
Oh, I see her
support
hand.
not factoring them in is because whether we end up with a percentage or a cap, it has to be based on some kind of data. Like, so if, to use your example, if you have 100 homes in an HOA and 100 not, then you say, oh, let's have 50 short-term rentals. We factored in homes that don't exist in that pool. So we have a skewed number. So I don't think it's that complicated. I think if you're in an HOA, we're a short-term rental committee. We should just be looking at the numbers and make our decisions, be it a cap, be it a percentage, based on the pool of possible homes that could be a short-term rental, not homes that have nothing to do with that and won't. I also think that if we set up periodic reviews to look at those policies, so if for some reason there's a lot of HOAs popping up, then that could be that data would be useful too.
Carol?
Well, I guess my thinking is that if all of the STRs are kind of spread out through all of the neighborhoods, then everybody contributes, all of the neighborhoods contribute to the income of the city, going back to that it being part of our mission. If groups of people opt out of having any STRs, then that entire group is not contributing to the funding of the city services. And I'm just wondering, how is it that HOAs are allowed to vote out any STRs, period? Maybe it should be citywide, and all organizations or all homes are eligible. I know in our little condo complex, which is 4, we have a 50%. 2 of our units are rented out for or have short-term rental licenses, and 2 do not. So it's at 50%. But if it wasn't an option, or if all of the houses were included or all were eligible, then maybe that's how it should be.
I don't think you can, I mean, that's part of being an HOA. They can set those kind of rules. They can say you have to paint your house robin egg blue. I mean,
Right.
that's, so I don't think you can say if you are an HOA in the city of Manzanita, you have to allow STRs.
But
Phil?
then that group of HOAs do not contribute to the income of the city.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Phil?
right.
Well, wait, they just don't contribute to the income that's generated from STRs.
Correct.
They're paying
Right.
property
Which is-
taxes.
Which they're paying property taxes, but
Yeah,
9% of profits is quite a bit of money for the city.
Phil?
Anyway, I'm not sure.
But that person has chosen to run a business in that home. That's the difference.
Michael?
Well, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, I just boy, I kind of got lost in that last one for a second. Interesting, but I think bigger discussion than what we're doing right now. But yeah, get the take the HOAs out of there. Whether you advocate for a percentage based or a cap, I think they if it's percentage based, then they influence they skew the numbers for that. And if it's a cap based, then you're still going to have to go through this process of considering them when you pick whatever that number is, whatever your methodology is for that. But what I will say is, HOAs, we're talking glacial. It's not like business license, you got it type of thing. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to get to that point. And I think it's not too arduous to consider that. And knowing that it's not like within a short amount of time, that HOA can dissolve and all those houses are brought back in. But that being said, I think it's not like a house by house by house by house. We know what that development is going to be. It's going to be a 200 home build out. So it's just by saying that development has an HOA, that's all the math we need to do is just to remove them from the equation. So it's not as dynamic as a 1-for-1 type of things. It's kind of a set it and forget it. So I don't know, but I think there's a little bit of speculation. I'd be really curious what the city staff would have to say as far as managing and weighing that in, and what implementing that, how hard it would be. But that would be my thought is, take the HOAs out of the total, because otherwise we're going to be loading up other zones or other neighborhoods or whatever you want to think about it with more. I mean, that's when I first moved here, that's how it was explained to me. I said, I asked about short-term rentals, and there was this kind of, short-term rentals, and this is what's happening. We have all these homes being built, and by the way, they're all going to be all the licenses are going to be in the beach neighborhoods, and so, gosh, and that was 3 years ago. So what an opportunity to try to be able to address that now and kind of put that issue to rest.
So where are we on, we've heard pros, cons on caps versus percentage. Anybody's mind changed? Anybody have any? And just take all of those questions, the C4, the C1, the R4, the HOAs, the percentage versus cap. Where do we go from here? And can we come to any conclusions today, or do we need to just kind of mull on this and talk about it again next month?
Let's not figure it out today. Let's definitely. I think we have some really good ideas, some really passionate ideas, and let's think about this a little bit. And maybe in terms of order, it feels like we want to probably figure out do we keep C1 and R4? Can we bring it into the citywide cap so that we have a full citywide cap? I think HOAs is dependent on whether we do percentage or total number. If we do total number, then HOAs doesn't matter. So maybe we wait to if percentage is the way to go, then HOA has to be determined. So I'll just say this, just real quick on numbers. I'll probably not win anybody over on this, but I'll just say, like, when you talk to, I mean, there's 260 some short-term rentals. Talk to owners and ask them, how tough has it been to find cleaners? The cleaners are the key to the amount of money that's coming to the city. If we don't have cleaners, we can't do short-term rentals. This process doesn't work. And we're basically hitting the total number of labor that we have to be able to do this. To Carol's point, we can't go percentage based up to 300s and still make this a sustainable thing. There's a number that makes sense for short-term rentals and that's sustainable. And it doesn't matter how much land we have and how many more houses we can build here. We really have a certain amount of people that we need from a service level to sustain short-term rentals, to sustain our stores, our groceries, our cafes, our restaurants, and we're running low on those. And we have to be aware of, we can't really, it's not sustainable to get to 300s in short-term rentals.
I think the other thing that we should do as we go forward with this is, we're not going to come to any decisions today, but we also want to give options to the council. So we can say as a group, we would favor this approach, and here's why. But here's the other approach, and here's what would need to be considered there. So for instance, if we decided as a group, and we kind of like caps better, but if we do percentages, here's the percentage that we would consider, and here's what we feel about HOAs within that percentage calculation. So I think we need to show, again, we need to show our work. We need to show which way we are leaning, definitely. But then it goes to the council to come to the final decision. Cheryl?
So I just want to say, I'm not opposed to coming up with a number. I think Patrick has a good argument there. My question at this time, though, is the number seems it just seems out of the, say it again?
Arbitrary?
It just seems, yes, it seems, thank you very much, arbitrary until we look at some of these things we've discussed around density. Because if we say, okay, it's going to be 250 feet, then we go through and we do the math. What if we come up with a number that's not in line with the number we set as the target? So that's all I'm saying is before we come up with a number, we need to figure out like what does it look like on the ground? And if we are going to do these densities, because I would hate to come up with a number and then have to backtrack and say, oh, well, we were just kidding. That's not really going to work out because now we're doing this density thing or whatever. So I think it's just, that's my concern about a number. I support you, Patrick, in that we're going to reach a limit. We just can't have a percentage that keeps growing and growing. But I want that number to be based on something, not just that it feels like it's a good number to start with. I think we need to do some math and do some thinking about how it actually lays it out. We haven't even gotten to this thing about our neighborhoods all going to be the same in terms of density, or are we going to have different density based on lots? So I think we have some footwork to do before we come up with the number.
Sure, I just want to go out.
Oh, just real quick to follow up on that, I'll just say, I don't think, I think these can be done together and separately. And I'll just say, if we did set a number, if it was 300, if it was something like that, remember, density will rule. Whatever we determine with respect to density, like if we were to go to the extreme Vegas example of 600, there's no way we could even fit 300 in, because there, with these density parameters, you begin to whittle it down. It's just to create a backstop so that whatever we do doesn't get above this number before we figure out our density concepts. And density will rule, no, regardless of what our total is. Right. Density will make sure that it comes down from that over time. So I think to start with a backstop allows us to have the density fill in the rest.
But doesn't that make the city vulnerable? I just feel like if we don't have two recommendations in line with one another, I think that's confusing to people. I think if you have some density set up, then at least we're going to come up with a number that's based on something.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I totally get that. I think, and I'll be honest with you, I think these don't come out at the same time. I don't think, I think density will take a lot longer than a citywide cap. And I think density also, it's worth taking some time on density to figure out, have the steps we've taken already have made positive changes. Do we have as many things to correct? And can we give Max some time to see how are things working? Are some of the issues that were the biggest deals, parking, noise, parties, have these been corrected without potentially, before we put density into place, let's take a look at the changes we made so far and how well did they work? And we can do that potentially by having this backstop of a citywide thing, and then take a look at how things have worked in this first year, and then make sure that, and density, I think density does come second, and I think that's okay. And it's not confusing. I think we have a process in place to work on these one by one. And I think it does kind of fit to do them in different stages. But I see where you're coming to from, Cheryl. I respect everything that everybody's saying on this group. I respect everybody on this team, and I appreciate everybody's input, because we're gonna do better by having more ideas rather than less.
I agree also, Cheryl. I think we need to keep those in our head, but we can do one. We don't have to take it to council until we've also looked at some of those things. But I will say regarding density does not only mean how far the houses are from each other. I think there are so many, and I personally don't think putting a proximity limit is going to do anything towards what Catherine is saying is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? I think we can look and have a much better result if we look at occupancy, like Tillamook County has done. If we look at type, is it a mom and pop? Do we have 12 mom and pops on the street? And that gets again to Phil's, what's the size of the lot? Or do we have 12 two-story 5-bedroom houses? So I think we look at those, and just when you're talking about density, it's not just how far apart they are from each other. Also, we need to keep in mind that according to the survey, people were more upset about short-term rentals in the less dense neighborhoods than they were on the beach. Partly because there's less full-timers to complain, but even the percentage of the full-timers that were there were complaining less because they know that's where they live, just like Michael knows he lives in the R4 zone. So, Michael?
Well, I was just thinking about next steps here. Would it be helpful? I like how the questions were in the agenda, and using those as kind of a prompt to carry this forward to where we can, within this group, have some type of decision-making framework. I mean, can we maybe start a Google Doc with those questions, maybe building from what Patrick had already put together, and then say, what are our information needs for this? If it's something like I'd want to know what we expect based on the buildable lands inventory, what we expect. And it's not to say, oh, we'll get to population 2000. Half of those available lots might be in wetlands or something where they're not, or to have topography issues that they just can't be built on, and so it's not realistic to include them. So the city will have that information, I think. The other thing too is there might be, as we dig into density, depending on Brian's availability to help us out, there might be some real quick GIS analysis, spatial analysis that can happen that would help, kind of clarify what that looks like. If we have a density of 600 feet, we've all been talking about, Manzanita is a lot smaller than Vegas, but I mean, if we do a 600-foot buffer over every STR, we might be down to like 50 or something like that. So let's have some data. So maybe having the questions and then responding, we can, each of this group can respond underneath those questions where here's what I need to know, or clarification of what this looks like to make to weigh in on this.
I like that, Michael. And the first thing on the list is the buildable lands inventory. We need not just the number, but we need to know where they are. Is that a gettable thing, Linda? Do you know?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know how recent it is, that I can follow up on that.
Okay. Yeah, let's start that Google Doc. Carol, you got to learn how to use Google Docs, right?
Right. You guys got to help me.
Okay. And Max will make sure that you're on that as well. Anything else? Okay, so next time we'll do this again, and we'll keep talking about it, and we'll look at if you've got, here's what I need to make a decision. That's a question that's going to go on the Google Doc, which I will put out as soon as we're done with this call. So you'll be able to get to it on the STR committee.
Hey, Joe, real quick question. This might have come up before, but is there whether it's quarterly or maybe monthly, if we had, a quick 5 minutes at the beginning of each of our meetings to just have kind of a state of STRs in Manzanita, just a quick check on the number of them, number of citations, available licenses. I mean, that's stuff that I think is important context for some of the discussions we have. And I think it's helpful for the folks that are viewing these meetings too, to have that information to them. If that's a Judy question, but if it's not too arduous to have that as just a quick snapshot of where
Well,
they
that
are.
number of SDRs is easy. You just go on the website and she keeps that really up to date. You can just look. But Max, do you know how many complaints you've dealt with since you started, which would be about a month-ish?
If I'm gonna give you I'm looking at my notebook right now. I think I've dealt with around 5 STR complaints. So the biggest issue that I have seen is people will call the building people and not me. And so they're not here on the weekends. And I won't know they called until Monday. And so I had someone recently call Saturday evening, and then Chris Bird from the building department told me about it on Monday. So there was a day buffer between communicating with them. So I've been to a couple houses, but the biggest thing is letting people know, handing out my number and my email. So when there is an issue, they can call me and not feel like they're being ignored or not being heard, because that's the biggest thing going on right now.
Any thoughts on how to fix to get the word out that you exist?
I think a lot of the neighbors talk to each other. I've talked to people who called for their neighbor, and I have given them my information, and I've actually gotten calls from people saying they received my number from them. I don't think there's anything on the Manzanita website with my number, but every chance that I get, I hand out my business cards and do the best I can to let people know I'm here. But I guess if I could put in my 2 cents, putting my phone number on the city website would probably be a good step forward to let people know I'm here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I've encouraged people to call you, Max. People come to me with a complaint, and I'm like, oh, please call Max, because he's starting to keep track of these issues. And even if it can be just solved by education or whatever, just to keep you in the loop.
Yes, of course. That is always do that. I hate when people call, and it's hard because this happened on Saturday, but now it's Monday because they called the wrong number. But luckily I'll communicate with them the situation and go an educational route with contacting me.
I expect this percentage to be high because people still are a little confused about what your job is, but of the all of the calls that you responded to, what percent was that 5?
Like the percentage of it being short-term rentals,
right,
out of all the calls I've attended. Without having my documentation thing to pull up, I don't want to give you a skewed percentage number regarding that. But if I had to do a ballpark, I would probably do 20%. And I think that's a lot of people don't know I'm here.
right.
And like I said, I've been trying to get my number out and handing out my business cards like candy. So
okay, I would say I'm
the stickers and the good neighbor letter will help.
yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
And the window film, even if you put it in your cabinet. I'm pleasantly surprised that your guess is 20%. I would have thought it would be more like 80%.
During oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just because people think that you're strictly for short-term rentals.
Yeah, so a lot of things. Labor Day weekend was very popular, but they were calling the wrong number, which I think is why the number I'm giving you might be a little skewed. I think the number would be higher if people knew I was here.
Right.
I think people know I'm here. They just don't know how to contact me. So I've been trying to make it my goal.
Hmm.
And I've said this a couple times, but just to have people know that I'm here and hand out those cards as much as I can. And Sergeant Mike letting me, or Sergeant Sims, telling people also.
Yeah, and having your number on the website, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm just looking at the website right now, and I think under the city of Manzanita on the front page would be a good place, along with the short-term rental, in the short-term rental information that you have.
It needs to be, and Max and Mike and I have talked about this. It needs to go along with a complaint procedure, which is in process, but it needs to be kind of pushed along, I think.
Okay,
because we don't
Yeah,
want people, short-term rental complaints, we don't want them calling Max first. We want them calling Patrick first or Michael first. We want them to call the owner or agent first before they call Max.
Okay.
But we do want them to know how to call Max. So that's the complaint form.
Okay.
Mhm.
Anything else? All right, I think we used that extra 20 minutes. Carol?
Yeah.
I just was wondering if Linda did a summary of the list from the conversations with counselors. Did that ever get done, Linda, or is that
Oh,
something
yeah,
that we can have?
Yes. Right afterwards, I compiled it from all of the counselors and then sent it to Joe.
I thought
I would love a copy of that, Joe.
it's on the shared Google Doc page, I believe. If it's
Uh-oh.
in-
Oh
You can
dear,
do it.
I'll have to, I know you think I can do it. Okay,
You can do
I'll
it.
try and find it. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
I have down that our next meeting would be October 20th, which is the third Friday of next month.
Thank you.
For the minutes. Yeah, and I'll put that on the STR meeting minutes.
Okay. And I'll put out I'll start the Google Doc with here's what we need to have before we can come up with any answers. And you can just add to it as you think of things. Anything else?
I'll get the buildable lands inventory to you, Joe.
Okay, thank you. Michael Gardner, you have anything to say? I don't know if that's,
No, I'm fine. Thanks. Thanks for letting
Okay.
me participate.
thanks. You're always here. We appreciate that. Linda or Mark, I don't know which one of you it is. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you all very much, and we'll do this again next month and hopefully get a little closer.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Good
Have a good
progress
day.
today. Yeah.
Yeah, bye-bye.